That's what's going on. People are pissed. Enough is enough. You're now starting to screw with my business and the trajectory of my own life. And I'm going to stand up for what is going to make me and my company better. And that's what these executives are doing now.
There were existential threats to their business that came if they did not align directly with the administration.
There's been crazy initiatives by many politicians in many countries over the past several years that just don't make sense and have absolutely held back people's lives and ruined them. If you're a Canadian looking at the US, you got to be pissed right now. I'd be super frustrated.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name's Austin Bronner. I'm here with my co-host, Cody Shirk, back from California, back in Florida. Dude, how you doing? How was the how was your holidays?
It was good. It was good to see the family. It's good to be in California. My heart and soul is there, but my brain is not. I live in Florida full time right now. And yeah, we had a great time. Kids got dirty in the mountains and at the beach, and it was cold. And then I got back last night, and it's cold in Florida. No one knows this, but South Florida gets cold sometimes. And this morning it was 41, which was...
Did you get a surf out there?
You know what? I didn't. Yeah, I arrived. There was a huge swell in California about...
Oh, insane. I mean,
yeah.
the guy that hit... There was a guy that surfed like... They're claiming 100-foot wave, right?
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. This is going to take a long time to certify, but the wave at Mavericks, they're saying was 108 feet. This Aloe, his name's Aloe, surfed at Alistair. And we'll see what happens. But if it is in fact certified as 108, that takes the throne away from Portugal, Nazaré, which is the big wave spot there, and goes back to California, which is a really big deal in the surfing world. And as a Californian, I'm like, yeah, California took it back.
But he kind of blew it out of the water. Like, the last one's 80 feet, right? And they're claiming this is over 100, and so that'd be by 20 feet.
There's a joke in the surfing world about how you measure waves. You've got Florida style, California, and then Hawaii. So like a 20-foot Florida wave is like a 10-foot California wave is a 4-foot Hawaiian wave. And it's a joke in the surfing world, but it's also a little bit true. Measuring a wave is super subjective because you could go to a wave like Chopu, which is that wave that looks like a slab, looks like the ocean's folding over on itself. And the back of the wave is like, there's no back, it just folds over, but it's probably one of the heaviest waves in the world. And then you've got other waves that are super tall, but they're like really crumbly and like if you measure it as tall, but it's not very powerful. And so that's where the subjectivity comes in with measuring waves. And Mavericks is a terrifying wave because it's cold and dark and there's sharks out there. And the picture, we can throw the picture up here of this 108-foot wave is just, it's terrifying. Like, and especially as a surfer, you look at it, big. Just like, oh God, it just gives me the chills and sweaty palms. Look at that picture. It's terrifying.
I mean, yeah, I'm not a good surfer. I have surfed a little bit and it gives me the chills to just knowing like if you go down, you're underwater for minutes.
Yeah, and not only that, it's just you're getting ragdolled to death. It's such a violent experience that it's so indescribable that most people wouldn't understand how violent it is. The guy's surfing Niagara Falls, basically. In one insane. Wrong move, you're dead.
It's insane. Yeah, man, that's crazy. That is crazy. I had 3 days of just being at the house by myself, working. Just I had like some time to reflect on the last year. Oh my God. I forget what it's like to just be fully alone without children or responsibilities. So productive. That's a 3x. It's a 3 to 5x over a normal time.
Do you ever have those friends that send you YouTube videos or podcasts? Of course, we're doing a podcast. Like, yo, you got to watch this, you got to do that, and then you're like, how do you consume so much content? And I'm like, oh yeah, you don't have kids.
That's it.
But having kids makes you more productive, right? You like focus on the things that you need to do the most, and you just get rid of all the BS that doesn't matter.
For sure. I was talking about this with some friends. Like, I wasted so much time. One, I don't take any productivity advice from anybody who does not have kids anymore. Doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't work. And I realized how much time I wasted before having kids and having so much responsibility. It's like, am I more productive now? By the minute, for sure. Overall, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's it's fun and it's nice to have that little break, and just to get some stuff done. We got a good show today. I'm super excited. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. Before we dive in, I want to do a little shout out for a new review we got from Drudy21. Drudy21 says, super informative and entertaining, 5-star, great show. Austin and Cody cover many topics from cryptocurrency to U.S. politics, geopolitics, and investments in a highly interesting and informative way. I learn new things every week. Freaking love it. Thank you for the review. The best way to support the show, we would love to hear from you. Write us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's the best way to help us grow the show right now as we're in growth mode. We're adding new subscribers every single week. So welcome to all the new subscribers. Now let's dive into today's show. So big news. Justin, we've talked about this a couple weeks ago that we said Trudeau's in trouble. And then boom, Justin Trudeau.
He's a goner.
Resigned. He's gone. He resigned. And it's a big event considering that he's been the prime minister for over 9 years, and he resigned on January 6th amid declining approval ratings. There's a lot of internal party pressure, some criticism over the economy, and then also a lot of this kind of trade tensions that popped up between the U.S. and Trump and Trudeau and all this sort of thing. So let's dive into it. Cody, why did he resign? In your opinion?
This is one of those, like, there's a list of 1,000 items, and like, which one do you point to? And I wrote in my notes, why did he resign? Because he killed the economy. And I'm not going to say the economy is everything when it comes to a country. You got quality of life and everything, but at the end of the day, the economy is failing. People get pissed. Things start to fall off. The system falls off the rails. And people get pissed, and you can look at almost every single economic indicator since he took office has just declined or stagnated. And I would say of the list of 1,000 things you could point to, that's like most of them would fall into that economic category.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about human psychology is there's, I believe it's like ordinal versus cardinal, right? And ordinal meaning the order that you're like where you are in the order versus overall performance. And I might be butchering this a little bit, but basically people don't really care. Like if things are moving forward and everyone, the tide is rising, that's great. But really what they're looking at is how does their position rank compared to somebody else? And that's more important, right? So I think the thing that's very interesting, if you look at the Canadian economy performance versus the US and the real spending power of people in the US versus people in Canada, it's a record low for Canada. There's record GDP underperformance compared to the US over the last 5 years. I think that's what stings the most, right? And this is where I think a lot of sometimes when a lot of reports come out and they're like, oh, we're doing fine, or this grew here, or we made this progress. It doesn't really matter if people feel like somebody else who they compare themselves to is doing better than them. And that's like the number one thing that people care about.
Absolutely. And we talked about this, like you said, an episode or two ago. The GDP per capita today is the same as it was in 2012. Now, of course, GDP per capita is not the only way to look at quality of life or how an economy is doing. But as you said, when you have an economy, Canada, right next to the US, and the US is continuing to grow, and people are making more and more money every year, and then you have an economy right next door that's not growing in sync, you're looking at your neighbor and it's jealousy. The grass is greener.
Jealousy.
Yeah. And it's frustrating. Yeah. And who do you look at for the fault of that? Trudeau. And whether or not he's the only person to blame, he's certainly the fall person.
Clearly not,
Yeah, of course. There's lots of other things.
Politicians like to take responsibility, but there's so many factors.
Of course. And, what comes next will be interesting because at the end of the day, Canada is a very resource-rich country, so they have a lot of things going for them. And just going back on the GDP per capita topic, one of the big factors to why it lowered is they had an enormous amount of immigration over the past almost decade. The immigration last couple of years has been 2 to 3 times more than it was in previous years. So you have a massive influx of people coming into the country, which means per capita, you have more people and the GDP hasn't grown at the same rate. So that's why GDP per capita actually lowered. But you would expect that their GDP would actually catch up years from now, say let's 5 years from now, as those immigrants got normalized. Let's say normal society started making their own businesses, working for companies, etc. But that's the whole point of what Canadians are frustrated with, is that there's so much bureaucracy and taxes that it's actually stifled a lot of that growth and prohibited a lot of people from growing their business or making new businesses. And we'll see what happens in the coming years. I'm actually pretty bullish Canada, because I think they're almost like they've almost been held back, reined back. And so there could be a huge amount of growth in the coming years. But if you're a Canadian looking at the US, you got to be pissed right now. I'd be super frustrated.
So what's next? So there's lots of talk about next prime minister. There's Polymarket's projections, and then there's also pundits, right? So, what's the difference here?
So it depends what outlook you're looking at, meaning literally what media outlet is saying what. I just looked this morning, right before we recorded this podcast, I looked at Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal. I would say in general, Bloomberg is a little more left-leaning and Wall Street Journal is a little more right-leaning, although I don't really trust either of them. But Bloomberg made no mention of really any candidate other than the Liberal Party, which is Trudeau is a part of. They would basically mention all these people that would come up to replace Trudeau. And then
and effectively, just to be clear, he stepped down and he said somebody else is going to take over to lead the Liberal Party. So he's no longer going to be the leader of the Liberal Party.
Right, exactly. And so Bloomberg is basically saying who would be next in line. And there's a whole list of people, and I won't go into them right now. But I think the point is that even if, or when that happens, when he gets replaced in the Liberal Party, the tide has changed. People are not happy with that party. So the other candidate is Pierre Poilievre. How do you say it? I always mess it up. Poilievre? There's a French way and an English way. I'm going to call him Pierre right now. He's actually great. I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and I really like what he has to say. He is leading overwhelmingly in Polymarket polls. We'll throw up a couple of screenshots here. So then
it's 90%.
Yeah, next Prime Minister of Canada after the election would be, he's leading at 90%. And then the other poll, which is interesting on Polymarket, is which party wins most seats in Canadian election. And the Conservative Party, again, is actually higher than Pierre. It's at 94% right now. And I think that's the bigger picture, is this tide swing. So whatever media outlet you're looking at, they're choosing to focus on what topic is going on. But the bigger topic is that Canadians are pissed. They want to go a different direction.
Shifting.
Exactly. Yeah. And the party that Trudeau is a part of, no one's happy with. And the economy is highlighting why those people are not happy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're seeing a massive shift kind of worldwide, and people are shifting generally towards the right. And I'm not even going to say that, because it's mostly, a lot of it's just incumbent swapping. So whatever is in power, there's a massive swing to the other side. I don't know if you saw this, but Austria, for the first time since I think it was around World War II, they have their far right group has a mandate to form a government, right? So that's the first time in, what is that now, 80 years since the far right party, which is the Freedom Party, has a mandate to try to form a government. And it's a massive shift that's happening. So
well, I agree with you. Just like you said, I don't like when people are saying, oh, it's the left or the right. And actually, the Wall Street Journal this morning published an article that said the populists vying to lead Canada and end a decade of liberalism. And it's very much the right is populist and the left is liberal. And it just I feel like there's just that divisive left or right or black or white. It's just very frustrating. The reality is, at least from my perspective, is that there's been crazy initiatives by many politicians in many countries over the past several years that just don't make sense and have absolutely, held back people's lives and ruined them to in some instances. And that's what's going on. People are fucking pissed. And a perfect example is the trucker thing within Canada during the pandemic, where the truckers got debanked. They weren't allowed to bank because they basically took a different stance from the government. That's craziness. That's not a left or right thing. That's like a dictator taking control over a country and people having an uprising against people's lives being controlled.
It's like it's who's in power. Are we doing better than we were previously? And also on the other thing I was saying, it's, do we see other people that we relate to doing better than we are? If so, we're going for change because we don't like the way that things are going. So that's my take on it. I think it's very interesting. It's going to be exciting to watch it play out here. And we'll see, because again, Canada's a massive, our closest ally, the closest to us. It's there's a lot to get excited about with some change going on there.
Before we jump, sorry.
Yeah.
Last thing in Canada. Last time we talked about Canada being a 51st state, because that's a hot topic right now. On Polymarket, it's at 3%. I agree with you, like highly unlikely. But, and this is hard to tell, I want to know, I've seen multiple polls of Canadians in favor. And so anybody can maybe show us some other polls that show the opposite side of Canadians not in favor of becoming part of the U.S. I'd like to see that. But that's an interesting topic if the U.S. would somehow absorb Canada.
I think 3% is an accurate reflection. Although, man, you could make some serious money if you bet the opposite. Well, speaking of interesting acquisitions for the U.S., right? Greenland. Trump's been going off and talking about, again, going back to this, making statements about how Greenland should become part of the U.S. or thinking about how Greenland could become part of the U.S. He says that ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity for the U.S. This is a quote, and that the people of Greenland will benefit tremendously if and when they become part of the U.S. He also stated that he's hearing that the people of Greenland are MAGA. I don't know who he's hearing that from. And it's interesting because Don Jr. is in Greenland recording a podcast. He says he's not meeting with any of the political representatives. Why is Trump so fired up about Greenland? Why is he? I mean, this has been something he talked about last time, but yeah, what's going on there, and why is it a topic of consideration?
There's so many things going on here. I just want to throw out there first that Greenland's 3 times the size of Texas, but has a population of 57,000 people. So the population's a tiny U.S. city. It's barely anyone.
Yeah, it's a town. Oh
yeah, it's so small. In fact, if you have a free time on your hands, go on Google Earth and start scoping around Greenland. It's nothingness. So why does Trump want Greenland? There's probably 3 main reasons. One is energy. The potential oil, gas that could be there, and is pretty well known that there are a lot of other metals and mining opportunities there, would be long-term strategic for the U.S. Number 2 is security. So having military bases there, the ability to monitor other countries in this larger buffer zone. And then the third, I would just say, is influence, is having the ability to have more influence in the Arctic and also just more towards Europe and throughout the Atlantic. Although Greenland, it's pretty far up there. So it seems unimportant, but I think as time goes on, the Arctic area is going to be becoming more and more important to control. And I think that's what Trump sees right now.
We'll talk a little bit about the space base that's up there. This is very interesting. So it used to be called, I believe, Thule Air Base. It's been rebranded, renamed. What's going on there? Because this isn't something that's known by many people. We have a space base in Greenland. What is it, and what does it do?
So it was renamed to, I'm going to say it how it's spelled, Pidufik, but it's pronounced Bidufik. And you can look this up, and it's the northernmost military base the U.S. operates, and it's in Greenland. And we'll throw up a screenshot here. I got it from Google Earth. It's way the heck up there, and it is, I can't imagine how cold it is there. But what it has is it's actually a military base that's been in operation since the 1950s. It used to be mostly Army, and it was during the Cold War. They can do a lot of monitoring of Russia and having observation of this Arctic region. However, over the past several years, the Space Force has taken over a lot of the operations there. There's about 650 active men and women there that are doing operations for the Air Force and the Space Force. And they're doing monitoring of satellites, actual radar monitoring, and then I would say occupation of this region, just having an outpost in this region of the world. And I think, again, this is going to be becoming more and more important for the U.S. to have influence in this Arctic area.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm pro Greenland acquisition. I'm pro. I think regardless of like what happens, I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. And if you look at Greenland's a province of Denmark, and if there's a way to add to the U.S. and add something, I think it's very interesting. I think I'm pro.
So the PM of Greenland is pro going away from Denmark. They want to distance themselves from Denmark, but they have not said they'd like to join the U.S. In fact, they said, we're not for sale. We just want to get away from Denmark. So that's their stance.
Be their own. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, and whatever, even if it's just like a shift from the way of thinking in the past, I'm interested in it, and I would be pro Greenland, and maybe Greenland would be the 51st state, not Canada. I think it's way more likely than Canada.
Yeah, I also think that the way the world is right now, especially from a U.S. perspective, the idea of the U.S. adding another state or another territory is like, it doesn't even seem like a reality. But I think my dad was born in 1946. I think, was it Hawaii or Alaska became a state after that? So my point is that my direct relative was born prior to us having one of these states. So the idea that we could add more to our territory is totally realistic. And if you look at countries and empires over time, it's actually pretty rare that empires have not morphed to be larger or smaller. I mean, we've seen it happen with Russia right now.
1959, August 21st, 1959, Hawaii became the 50th state.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, that's not that long ago. And there's I don't know maybe how many people. I'm guessing there's way less people in Greenland than were in Hawaii.
Oh yeah.
Well, interesting. We'll see. I mean, again, back to it's kind of some of the same things we've been talking about for a long time, which is rare earth minerals, resources, there's going to be continued pressure to acquire more of these because we're just using more and more and more. And so we'll see. Kind of connected to it, it's very interesting. So there's been some radical shifts in some of the higher up people in the tech world, and kind of a general vibe shift on the whole side of censorship. And I've been following, if you've been following Mark Zuckerberg's been making massive changes to his identity, to Facebook, to Meta, from Facebook to Meta. As Facebook was rebranded with Meta, Zuck also completely rebranded himself from this kind of techno robot type guy to a UFC loving, jujitsu rolling, t-shirt wearing, chain wearing, long haired guy. And, one of the things I saw earlier this week was he appointed Dana White, who's the head of the UFC, to the Meta board, which is like a massive shift in terms of free speech. And then he came out with this video he released talking about kind of the shift that's going to be happening with Facebook and Instagram towards free speech and away from censorship. So very interesting video. We'll play a little bit of it here so you can see some of the stuff he's talking about.
Hey everyone. I want to talk about something important today because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
What were your kind of biggest takeaways from that video with Zuck, and the thing that surprised you the most?
Well, like you said, whoever the PR firm or his representative that's changed his identity, good on him, because, or her, whoever did that for Zuck did a good job. I feel like he's so much more relatable now. He's not the robot. Of the things he says in this video, though, that I think are most interesting, well, I can go down the list. Do you want to go over each topic? Because I think they're all interesting.
do you think that it's actually the opposite, that it's him firing and being more himself? Because, like, let's just say there was probably nobody who is more restrained than him previously, and now he seems to be actually speaking truth, speaking his ideas without restraint. Do you think that he's actually just fired and got somebody else, fired it and brought somebody else in and was like, listen, I'm just going to talk about this stuff? He's seen like the benefits that have come to other CEOs from being more authentic, and he's like, I'm just going to be myself? Or is this an orchestrated thing that that is just purely him redesigning and retooling and just following, like a politician, following the winds of change?
You're probably right, Austin. He probably is just going with his gut now and using his own strategy and the strategy prior, which was be this clean, polished dude that doesn't really take any stance on things and tries to walk the line, was what he was doing before, which has got him in so much trouble. I actually have a friend who's pretty close with him, and I won't go into any more detail, but I hear he's a pretty good dude in real life. He's a stand-up guy, and a lot of what he personally believes in and pursues in his life is almost completely opposite of what he's known for over the past decade. And I think it's important to state that about 6 months ago, do you remember when they released a statement that Meta, which was Facebook at the time, was being directly censored by the U.S. government? The U.S. government there and said, hey, you can't say this, you can't say this, you need to throttle this, you need to take this off the platform. And that didn't really make the news much. That went out there and it was kind of like a fart in church. Nobody really talked about it, but that's a huge deal. I don't know how many Facebook users are in the US, but globally, billions, right? And they're basically controlling the message based on what governments specifically want said or not said. And the US government was probably one of the worst violators of this. And he was directly under the thumb of the US government. So Zuck, was playing that game. And a side note, I think Bezos, I think Zuck, I think pretty much all of these tech people, any like super successful billionaire, they don't really have strong politics, meaning they look at the game that's going on. If it's a left-run country or a right-run country or whatever the game rules are, and they just play by the rules. And whoever can play by the rules the best ends up winning the most. And I think these guys are so competitive that that's what they go after. They're not really sticking to political ideologies to run their company. They're just saying, what's the game like right now? How do I play by the rules? How do I make the most money? How do I win? And that's what I'm going to do. And I think that's a better way to look at these guys rather than say like, they're trying to stick to one side or the other.
Well, I think that actually worked for a long time, and it's been one of the things that has changed and shifted was that in the last administration, there were some challenges that they started to face, like existential threats to their business that came if they did not align directly with the administration. A good example, like we were talking about with the statement about them being pressured to censor things, and everyone's gone through the same experience over the last 4 to 5 years of seeing censorship being put out in real time, right? And then seeing it done incorrectly and seeing it censor things that should not be censored. I imagine that the whole Facebook thing, when they were told, hey, the Hunter Biden laptop is a fake, it's a Russian, disinformation thing. And then to be told that, to censor it, and then for it to come out that it was actually the real thing, you lose a lot of trust, right? And that's why I think it's the only reason that Elon went so hard in this last election to support Trump and, effectively swing the election by going to Pennsylvania and just setting up shop and making sure that they had enough people to win in Pennsylvania, enough people registered to win in Pennsylvania, was because he sensed an existential threat to his business. And to your point, I think you're right. Most people are just going to be like, well, let's just stay out of it and let's focus on our business, unless it gets to the point where it becomes existential. And it seems to have become existential for some of these companies.
Yeah, I mean, you got Larry Ellison that supported Musk buying Twitter. He literally financed the deal. You have Bezos that had the Washington Post not put out a support of a specific presidential candidate. You have Zuck doing everything he's going right now. And I can continue to go down the list. All of these people saying, finally, enough is enough. You're now starting to screw with my business and the trajectory of my own life. And I'm going to stand up for what is going to make me and my company better. And that's what these executives are doing now.
So back to some of the things that he's talked about. So one of them was community notes for Meta, which is so away from a trust and away from fact checking towards community notes. Very interesting. Yeah, talk a little bit about that. What does that mean?
He, in this video, he basically says that the fact checking process they had before was impossible to not have a political bias on it. Because if you have a centralized fact checking agency, it's centralized. There's no way you can't have a bias of some sort. So how could you be the fact checker if you're like, you have a stance? So he is suggesting, or he's proposing, that they're going to launch some sort of community notes way to check posts. And he actually cited X in his video. And this morning, Musk, said, good on you, Zuck. This is great. Good job, dude. And so
it's been, I think community notes have been incredibly effective for people who don't use Twitter that much or use X that much. It's a very good way of making sure that the stuff that's being posted can be tracked, flagged, and then updated with correct information. So if somebody puts out something, and again, Elon's been community noted multiple times for things that he says that maybe aren't exactly accurate. So there's no like, I'm above the community notes.
Yeah, right? There's no arbiter of truth. There's no Orwellian like big eye in the sky. It's more just the people fact checking themselves. The next bullet point that was interesting, by the way, he goes down 5 or 6 bullet points. The next bullet point that I thought was interesting, and I'm using quotes here, they're moving their trust and safety and content moderations teams out of California into Texas. So this is, got to be company number, whatever, 1,000 and whatever, to move from California to Texas. And the reason why they're doing that is, quote, to build trust in a place where there is less concern about bias. And what Zuck is literally saying is, people don't trust companies operating in California because there's such a strong bias there that they have to move their operations for Meta out of California into Texas to give the impression that...
Well, I think just specifically for the content moderation and the trust and safety.
Yes, of course.
Not the other parts.
No.
People trust things going in California, just not the fact that there's kind of like a one worldview coming from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, we're talking about this quote fact checking part of the company. We're talking about the basically the regulatory arm of Meta. They're moving out of California because they think internally, and the public thinks, that it's too biased being in California. And I think that's absolutely true. They're saying it in a very polished way, but that's literally what has happened over the past decade. And it's a big part of that has been the U.S. government influencing the way that they operate and telling them what they can and can't do.
He also said he's going to work with Trump to push back on other countries who want to censor on Facebook and Instagram, which is interesting. What do you take from that?
It's interesting. He literally says, "I'm going to work with Trump," and I think the speech that he says, it sounds casual, but it's very well worded. And the fact that he said that is pretty powerful. So everything that was happening in California with Meta and the US government pressuring Meta was happening just as much, if not more, in other countries, the censorship. And so if he's going to work with Trump to prevent other countries from censoring Meta and these other countries, that's a pretty big deal. And I'm sure there's a whole list of uprisings and coups and political changes that have happened in many other countries that you could probably attribute to a lot of the activities that were happening on Facebook. And translation, governments in other countries were telling Facebook what to do with the algorithm in other countries to control the sway of the activities of citizens in other countries.
I mean, happening in a bunch of places. Just the same stuff that's happening here has been happening here, has been happening in a bunch of other countries.
Right.
To even more, with more heavy-handed, in a more heavy-handed pursuit.
Exactly.
It's very interesting. I'm excited. I think it's another win for, at least a temporary win for free speech. And I'm interested to see how this continues to roll out, and like if we actually see more of a consensus of information. One of the things I find really interesting is I'll spend time on X and then spend time on Instagram, and there'll be completely different realities being portrayed, right? And on X, you'll generally get to the bottom of something much faster, in my opinion, than on Instagram. And obviously there's lots of stuff on X that is completely false and is inaccurate, but that gets kind of rooted out and community noted, and, you know, it's a process. But then you also will find the people who are on the kind of leading edge of finding the truth. They will be publishing things that are against the kind of normal narrative, and it'll get to the top eventually much faster than it will on Instagram. And then I feel like Instagram is just like behind because of all this, the content moderation. So I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah, and Instagram, which is owned by Meta, Facebook, and WhatsApp as well, I think they just have a long way to go. They've really fallen behind on the free speech algorithm, I would say. And this is me not knowing what Meta's algorithm actually is. By the way, X's is open source, so you can look at it. Not that I'm a developer and would know what to look at, but the point is that we don't really know what the algorithm of Meta is and how they serve things. But I would say they've gone so far, it's going to be hard for them to come back. But I'm sure they'll come back just because they have such a huge user base. Final thing on Zuck is that he is playing some 4D chess. That's not as much critiques as I have for the guy. He's obviously brilliant. He's savage when it comes to building things. And he brought Dana White onto the board of Meta, which people are calling this 4D chess move because Dana White is very good friends with Trump. And Trump, I don't think, likes Zuck at all, because you could point to the 2020 election of Facebook preventing Trump from being reelected. And you could also point to the 2016 election.
And also Zuck donated a bunch of money too against them.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's probably a lot of conflict there with Trump not liking Zuck, but Zuck's trying to doing this, you know, like, please let me back into the circle. So he brought Dana White onto the board of Meta, and this is kind of a arm's length, friend of a friend connection to Trump now. And Dana White is a pretty big free speech component. So I don't know how much influence he's going to have on Meta. Obviously, he also is a UFC guy, and Zuck likes to roll on the mats. So I think that was also a friendship thing. So I don't know how much influence Dana White's actually going to have on Meta, but I do think it is a very symbolic way to show what direction the company is headed.
Super interesting. I'm hopefully positive direction. Let's wrap up here with some top adventures of 2025, right? So first I'll say that one of the people that has inspired me the most is a guy named Jesse Itzler. Jesse Itzler, he talks a little bit about how when he creates his year, right, he thinks about the year. He's got this big calendar thing that he sells. You can have your whole year in front of you, and he puts on his calendar every year, he puts some large challenge for himself, and it's called a misogi. And that misogi is like a Japanese ritual of like purification and challenge. He has kind of modified it a little bit to be something that is a challenge that you attempt that is roughly, you have maybe a 50% chance of completing, but it's something that kind of defines your year, something that's very exciting and defines your year. And yeah, he's done a bunch of interviews on it. So if you want to go check out Jesse.
He also has the big ass calendar. I feel like we're
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. He sells this big ass calendar, and the whole idea, and I have actually a big calendar next to me here for the upcoming year. And the whole idea is he's like, if you start your year and you put down a massive challenge that you can like train for, prepare for, that you're looking forward to, at the end of the year, you'll always be able to look back on that year and say, I attempted or completed this big adventure.
He's definitely an inspiring guy.
Super inspiring. He does a bunch of other, he talks about a bunch of other things I've kind of like adopted during, to prepare for 2024. Like, clean out the office, get rid of all your papers, recognize people that you care about from the previous year, and then also commit to little micro, like mini adventure things. So all that being said, I'm working on that right now, creating like a misogi for myself. And I'm interested for you, man. What are your top adventures of 2025? I know you got a trip to Peru. What are you excited about for 2025?
Well, we have a lot of dinners coming up that we're co-hosting. So we're doing it in Austin. So if anybody wants to join us in Austin,
definitely not a misogi.
No, it's not, but it will be at a nice restaurant in Austin with a cool group. We already have I think 15, 20 people signed up for this dinner. We might cap it really soon because we don't want the dinner to be too big. We want to be...
We can only have 16. That's the max.
Okay,
so.
Then we're very close. We want it to be an intimate experience of, successful, motivated, curious people. And, I've hosted dinners around the world for the past decade. And that's really how I've gotten into such interesting investments and done cool business deals, just meeting cool people. And the only way you do that is by getting out there and meeting people. So we're hosting that in Austin on February 20th?
Yes.
Okay. Then we are also doing, I think we're doing a dinner in San Francisco in January, and we've got some other dinners planned coming up that we'll talk about. But for me...
what about adventures, Cody?
Yeah, adventures. Peru in April. So last week of April, anybody out there who is a surfer, or if you know a friend who's a surfer, I've got a once-in-a-lifetime trip. We're surfing in Peru with the world's first surfing champion. His name is Felipe Pomar. He's a good friend of mine. I've surfed with him in Kauai. I've surfed with him in Peru in pretty big surf, and he's 82 now, and you would be shocked. The guy is jacked. He can do pull-ups still. He can surf, and we're going to surf together in Peru the last week of April. So reach out if you want to join us on the trip. Some caveats: you need to surf, or at least know how to surf pretty well. There's going to be a big surf, but it's also going to be a health and wealth kind of trip. Felipe is a great example of health. I mean, again, he's 82 doing pull-ups. So you can't argue with a guy doing that. And he's also been an international real estate developer. So he's a really cool guy to talk with and figure out how he's made his money over the years in different countries. So that's going to be in April. And then other than that, I don't have any other huge adventures. A lot of stuff for the pie in the sky, but that's happening in April.
What are your... Well, I'll share a couple of my pie in the
Okay.
my things I've been excited about. I'm not sure if they're going to happen this year, but two big ones that for like inspiration for people. One is the Mongol Rally. I think have we talked about this?
We have, but this year I just read the website. You put the link up there. They're not going to Mongolia, but so they're going through the stands, right? They're leaving. Where are they?
No, I think you can they're going to be in Mongolia, but then you just can't, they're just not going to cut through Russia. So basically what the Mongol Rally is, which is this thing I've wanted to do for a long time, is you go and you just get this really shitty car and you drive it across Mongolia and the Stan countries. And it's this race that is really they call it an unroute and an unrace. So you're going from one side to the other. You just got to get there. And the whole goal is to do it in style, but in style of a crappy car with a guarantee that it's going to break down. You're going to have to fix it and have a bunch of adventures along the way. That one's super interesting to me. They're doing it this year. So that's the Adventurists. And then the other one that I'm like excited about, I don't know if it's going to be this year or not, but I really want to do it, is there is a company like there's this company that this guy I met that does these deserted island bushcraft.
We've been talking about this for a while.
I know it's so hard to pin down because it's like you have to go for like 10 days, right? And it's hard to do that with a 2.5-year-old. But you go and you get dropped in either Panama or Indonesia or the Philippines. And like some of them you drop out of a helicopter, then you swim into this island, and then you get some training on how to survive, and then you survive for like 4 days by yourself. And that's the thing I'm probably most excited about.
It's with a group of people, right? It's you and like a couple
group of
buddies or something.
Yeah, you train with like eight to 10 people, and then you're out there. And they do one in where is it? It's in like not Fiji. I think it's in Tonga, where you go out there and apparently there's just massive whale sharks, and you can swim from the beach and go and swim with the whale sharks. It sounds freaking incredible. So those are some of the things that I'm my inspiration for you guys if you're looking for an adventure for 2025. What's your pie in the sky?
Dude, I don't know. This is gonna sound kind of stupid, I guess, is that I've done a fair amount of international travel, and there's some parts of the world that just, I wouldn't say don't interest me anymore, but I've just kind of been there, done that. And maybe it's because when you have kids, you're just kind of get frustrated with a lot of the bureaucracy of traveling sometimes. So for me, I'm actually more excited about going to places that are just kind of remote and just doing backpacking and hiking or surfing just without anybody around and not really dealing with the hustle bustle of major cities. So that's really attractive to me. There's actually a company, of course, I'm always looking for surfing, but there's a company that does Alaska surf tours, and you're on this like old crab boat and they take you to Alaska, and it's obviously cold, but there's just really good waves up there. So I think that's probably one of those pie in the sky trips that I'd love to do at some point.
That is pretty epic. I've also heard of there's like moose hunting in Alaska that you go and you do with river rafts. And so you go up there and then you hunt a moose and then you river raft it out. That would be probably the most epic thing I could think of.
Mooses? Mises? What's the plural of moose? Moose.
I don't know.
A flock of moose.
I think mooses.
They scare the hell out of me. If you've ever been near a moose before, they're
so big. They're
massive.
So big.
That's like one of those American animals that people that haven't been in North America before like can't realize how big a moose is.
They're so tall.
Yeah, I'm not really a hunter. I mean, I'm not really against it. I don't know if it's not like a top of my list, but I feel like if you're hunting a moose, like you cannot screw up. Because if you mess up, that moose is stomping you. That thing is going to get after you. That's a high risk. That's like grizzly hunting.
Oh, man. Well, I'm interested to hear from you guys. What are your exciting adventures from 2025? Hit us up on Twitter because we are always looking for inspiration on something to get out there and do. For again, like that's my goal this year is to pick something that's super challenging, super fun, and adventurous, and get out and do it. So hopefully you can take that and be inspired by it. And thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you guys on the next episode.